The deed my grandfather left me included a weird strip of land I never paid attention to until I got the certified letter from the Lakeside Meadows HOA, demanding I maintain the common bridge on my property. That's when I pulled out the survey maps and realized the gated community of 250 homes had exactly one way in and out, and I owned every square inch of the bridge they needed to cross. My name is Frank Kimball, and I'm a 34-year-old software engineer who inherited my grandfather's modest property in northeastern Georgia when he passed 2 years ago. The land itself isn't much, just 12 acres of overgrown field and woods with a small cabin that needs work. But that bridge, that beautiful 50-foot concrete and steel bridge spanning Willow Creek, suddenly became the most important piece of real estate in Monroe County. I was sitting in my apartment in Atlanta when I opened the letter from someone named Brenda Morrison, HOA president. She informed me that as owner of the bridge providing essential access to their community, I was required to pay for its upkeep, maintain liability insurance, and submit to their architectural review committee for any changes. The letter had that special condescending tone that only HOA boards seem to master, explaining my obligations as if I were a child who needed guidance. I read it 3 times, then called my attorney friend Marcus Chen. "They want me to pay to maintain a bridge on my own property so they can use it for free?" I asked him. Marcus laughed. "Do you actually own it? Like, fee simple? No easements?" I drove down to Monroe County that weekend and spent 6 hours at the courthouse going through records. My grandfather had been a careful man, a retired civil engineer who understood property law better than most lawyers. The bridge had been built in 1987 when he developed his land. The Lakeside Meadows development came later in 1992, and their developer had approached my grandfather about purchasing the bridge or obtaining an easement. According to the notes in the file, my grandfather had refused. He offered to grant them access for an annual fee, but the developer thought he could bully an old man into giving it away. They had a backup plan for a second entrance off Highway 78, but that fell through when the Georgia Department of Transportation denied their access permit due to safety concerns about sight lines and traffic volume. So the developer built anyway, gambling that my grandfather would cave. He didn't. For 20 years, my grandfather allowed them to use his bridge while they argued about it. He was too nice to actually enforce his property rights, and the HOA apparently assumed they had some kind of prescriptive easement through long use. They were wrong. Georgia law requires 20 years of hostile continuous use for a prescriptive easement, but my grandfather's lawyer had sent them a letter every single year granting revocable permission for bridge access. Those letters destroyed any claim they might have had. The old man was smarter than anyone gave him credit for. I sat in my car outside the courthouse and looked at the copies of everything I had pulled. My property, my bridge, no easement, no obligation. Just 250 families who had built their lives in a gated community that I could cut off whenever I wanted. The practical side of my brain said to work out something reasonable. The petty side remembered every HOA horror story I had ever read and thought about the condescending tone of Brenda Morrison's letter telling me what my obligations were. I called Marcus back. "How much can I legally charge them?" "It's your bridge on your property. You can charge whatever you want. They can pay it or find another way in." "There is no other way in. The development is completely landlocked without my bridge." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Frank, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking about installing a toll booth." I spent Sunday driving around the property and the adjacent HOA community. Lakeside Meadows was exactly what you'd expect from a gated community developed in the 90s and gentrified over the past decade. Houses ranged from 300,000 to just over 1 million. Manicured lawns, architectural homogeneity, and probably 50 pages of CC&Rs, telling people what color they could paint their shutters. The bridge itself was in decent shape, which made sense since my grandfather had maintained it properly. It was wide enough for 2 lanes of traffic with narrow shoulders. There were no gates, just a small wooden sign on my side that said, "Private Bridge Kimball Property." I parked and walked across it. Willow Creek ran about 15 feet below, moving at a good pace from recent spring rains. On the far side, maybe 200 feet past the bridge, was the actual HOA gate with its brick columns and wrought iron fencing. A bored security guard sat in the gatehouse, probably making $12 an hour to wave at residents and check IDs for guests. The development sprawled beyond it, street after street of similar houses with their professional landscaping. I could see a playground, a pool facility, tennis courts. These people had money, and they were used to getting their way. My phone rang. Unknown number with a local area code. "This is Frank." "Mr. Kimball, this is Brenda Morrison from the Lakeside Meadows HOA. I wanted to follow up on the letter we sent regarding the bridge maintenance." Her voice matched her letter, syrupy sweet but with steel underneath. I could picture her perfectly. 50-something, blonde highlights, the kind of woman who asks to speak to managers as a hobby. "I got your letter," I said. "Wah. Wonderful. We need you to sign the maintenance agreement and provide proof of insurance by the end of the month. We've already lined up a contractor to do some resurfacing work in June." "On my bridge?" "Well, yes, on the community access bridge. We want to keep it in good condition for everyone's safety." I watched a BMW drive past me onto the bridge, heading into the community. "Mrs. Morrison, I don't think you understand the situation. That bridge is my private property. You don't get to tell me what maintenance to do or hire contractors to work on my land." Her tone shifted slightly. "Mr. Kimball, this bridge provides the only access to a community of 250 homes. Surely you understand that you have certain obligations as the property owner. My only obligation is to pay property taxes, which I do. What I don't have is any obligation to let you use my bridge for free." Silence. Then, "I'm sorry, what are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that if you want to use my private bridge, we need to negotiate terms, starting with you dropping the attitude in your letters. Mr. Kimball, this community has been using this bridge for over 30 years. With my grandfather's permission, which he granted year by year in writing specifically to prevent you from claiming any kind of easement. I have all the letters. Do you want me to read them to you?" More silence. I could practically hear her blood pressure rising. "What do you want?" she asked, the sweetness completely gone now. "I'm still figuring that out. But what I don't want is letters from your HOA telling me what my obligations are on my own property. I'll be in touch." I hung up before she could respond. Monday morning, I called in sick to work. I had plenty of PTO saved up and a sudden urge to spend some time at my inherited property. The cabin was dusty but habitable. I set up my laptop and spent the day researching toll roads, private bridge access fees, and property rights in Georgia. Legally, I was on rock-solid ground. The bridge was mine. I could charge for access or deny it completely. The HOA would have to sue me for an easement by necessity, and even then, they would likely have to pay fair market value for it. Better yet, Georgia law didn't require me to grant them an easement if doing so would unreasonably interfere with my use of my property, and I could make a solid argument that heavy traffic across my land interfered with my rural enjoyment of the property. But easement by necessity cases took years and cost a fortune in legal fees. In the meantime, I could do whatever I wanted. I called a contractor I found online who specialized in security equipment. How fast can you install a gate arm across a bridge? How wide is the bridge? 2 lanes, about 24 feet total. I could have a setup there by Wednesday if you're not picky about aesthetics. You want card readers, remote control, or just a manual arm? Let's start with a solid arm I can raise and lower, with card readers for people I authorize. Can you do that? $15,000 for the whole system, installed and operational. Do it. Tuesday morning, my phone started ringing at 6 a.m. Brenda Morrison, 3 calls in a row. Then, the HOA vice president, then someone identifying himself as the HOA attorney. I let them all go to voicemail and drove down to the property with a friend from college who worked in construction. We spent the day building a small booth structure on my side of the bridge, just big enough for one person to sit in with a space heater and a payment window. It wasn't fancy, but it was functional. The security equipment contractor showed up Wednesday morning with a crew of 3. By Wednesday afternoon, I had a proper gate arm across the bridge entrance, painted in cheerful red and white stripes. The control system was connected to a card reader and a manual override inside my new toll booth. I made a sign on my laptop and printed it at the FedEx office in town, then had it laminated and mounted on a post next to the gate. Private Bridge Kimball property. Access fee, $5 per crossing. Monthly passes available, $200 per vehicle. Annual passes, $2,000 per vehicle. Payment required. Questions? Contact bridge owner at my email. I activated the system at 8 p.m. on Wednesday night, right during dinner time when lots of people would be coming home. The first car to encounter the lowered gate was a Mercedes SUV driven by a woman in her 40s. She sat there for 30 seconds, presumably waiting for it to raise automatically like the HOA gate did. When nothing happened, she honked. Then she honked again. I walked out of the cabin and down to the bridge. "Can I help you?" I asked. "This gate won't open," she said, like she was reporting a malfunction. "That's correct, it's closed." "Well, I need to get home. I live in Lakeside Meadows." "That's fine. Access is $5 per crossing." She stared at me. "Excuse me?" "This is a private bridge on my property. The fee is $5 to cross. You can pay cash, card, or purchase a monthly or annual pass." "This is ridiculous. I'm not paying to use the bridge." "Then you're not crossing my bridge." 3 more cars had lined up behind her now. Someone honked. "You can't do this," she said, her voice rising. "Madam, this is my private property. I absolutely can do this. Now, would you like to pay the $5 fee, or should I have your vehicle towed for blocking my bridge approach?" She looked like she wanted to argue more, but the honking behind her was getting aggressive. She threw a $5 bill at me through the window. I picked it up, walked to the booth, and raised the gate. She gunned her engine and sped across. Over the next 2 hours, I collected fees from 47 vehicles. Some people paid without comment. Others argued, threatened, or demanded to speak to my supervisor. One guy actually called the county sheriff. Deputy Martinez showed up around 10 p.m., lights flashing. "Evening, officer," I said. "Sir, I got a call about someone blocking the bridge into Lakeside Meadows." "That would be me. Would you like to see my property deed?" I handed him the documentation I had prepared. He spent 10 minutes reading through it with his flashlight, occasionally looking up at me and then at the bridge. "This is really your bridge?" he asked. "Every inch of it." "And they don't have an easement?" "Nope. My grandfather granted them revocable permission for years, but there's no easement on record. I had the title searched professionally." Deputy Martinez shook his head slowly. "Man, those HOA folks are going to lose their minds." "They already are. I've had about 50 calls today that I haven't answered." "You know they're going to sue you." "Let them. I'm not doing anything illegal." He handed me back my papers. "No, sir, you're not. Private property rights are pretty clear in Georgia. Just, try to keep things peaceful if you can." "I'm not looking for trouble, Deputy. I'm just charging for use of my property." He left, and I went back to collecting tolls. By midnight, I had made $380 and had enough angry glares to power a small city. Thursday morning, I woke up to find 20 cars lined up at the bridge at 6 a.m. The morning commute was starting early. I got dressed, grabbed my cash box and card reader, and opened the toll booth. The system worked pretty smoothly once people accepted they had to pay. Swipe or insert card, gate opens, drive through. The people who insisted on arguing slowed everything down, but most residents seemed to have decided that $5 wasn't worth being late to work. At 7:30 a.m., a white Lexus pulled up. Brenda Morrison herself, looking exactly like I had pictured her. Blonde highlights, expensive athleisure wear, the expression of someone deeply offended by reality. She got out of her car, ignoring the honking from the growing line behind her. "Mr. Kimball, this is outrageous. You need to remove this gate immediately." "Good morning, Mrs. Morrison. Fee is $5. I am not paying a fee to cross a bridge that provides access to my home." "Then you're not crossing, but you are blocking my bridge approach and preventing other people from paying their fees. So either pay up or move your vehicle." She pulled out her phone. "I'm calling our attorney right now. You won't get away with this. Call whoever you want. Still $5. A man in a truck behind her leaned on his horn and shouted, "Brenda, just pay the damn $5. Some of us have jobs." Her face went red. She threw a $5 bill at me, got back in her Lexus, and screeched across the bridge once I raised the gate. By the end of Thursday, I had processed 238 vehicles and collected over $1,000. I also had 17 voicemails from the HOA's attorney, Thomas Pritchard, demanding I call him back immediately. I called Marcus instead. "They're threatening to sue for easement by necessity," I told him. "Let them. That case will take 2 years minimum, and they'll probably lose anyway. In the meantime, you can charge whatever you want." "They're also threatening criminal charges for extortion." Marcus laughed. "That's nonsense. You're charging a fee for use of private property. That's not extortion, that's business. If they push that angle, countersue for harassment." "What about the HOA members who can't afford the fees?" "Not your problem, Frank. They chose to buy in a landlocked development. Their beef is with the developer who built without securing proper access rights, not with you." Friday morning, I increased my rates, $10 per crossing, $400 per month, $4,000 per year. I updated my signs and sent an email to the address I had collected from license plate registrations and payment records. The response was immediate and volcanic. My email inbox filled with messages ranging from desperate pleas to graphic death threats. I forwarded the threats to Deputy Martinez and kept charging. The weekend was chaos. Families trying to go to soccer games, shopping trips, visiting relatives, all funneling through my toll bridge. I hired 2 college kids to help manage the weekend rush, paying them $15 an hour each. We processed over 800 vehicles across Saturday and Sunday. Monday morning, exactly 1 week after I had installed the toll booth, I found a process server waiting at the bridge. I was being sued by the Lakeside Meadows HOA for easement by necessity, intentional interference with property rights, and about 6 other claims that sounded scary but probably wouldn't stick. I called Marcus and sent him the papers. "Good news," he said after reviewing them. "Half these claims are garbage and the other half will take forever to litigate. Did you know they're asking for emergency injunctive relief?" "What does that mean?" "They want a judge to force you to open the bridge for free while the case is pending. There's a hearing on Wednesday." "Can they do that?" "They can ask. Whether they'll get it is another question. You need to be there with an attorney." "Can you do it?" "I'm a contracts guy, Frank. You need a property litigator, but I know someone good." He connected me with Diana Pacheco, a hard-nosed property rights attorney in Athens who had made her career defending landowners against government overreach and HOA abuse. She had silver hair, steel-rimmed glasses, and the courtroom presence of a battleship. We met Tuesday morning at her office. "I love this case," she said, reading through my documentation. "Your grandfather was brilliant. These annual permission letters are perfect. And the HOA's own CC and Rs don't mention bridge access at all, which means they acknowledged from the beginning that it wasn't theirs." "Can they force me to let them use it for free?" "Not permanently. Temporary injunction. Maybe if the judge is worried about health and safety access, but you'd be entitled to reasonable compensation even under an injunction, and we can argue that your current fees are reasonable given the traffic volume and wear on your property." "What are my chances?" "Of winning the overall case? 80%. Of avoiding the injunction? 50-50. Judges don't like it when hundreds of people can't access their homes, even if the law is on your side." The hearing Wednesday afternoon was in Monroe County Superior Court. The HOA brought Thomas Pritchard, a lawyer who probably cost $500 an hour and looked like he was dressed for federal court rather than a county property dispute. Judge Raymond Hayes was in his 60s, a local fixture who had apparently been on the bench since before I was born. Pritchard went first, painting me as a greedy opportunist holding an entire community hostage for profit. He emphasized the elderly residents, the families with children, the essential workers who needed reliable access to their homes. He made it sound like I was one step away from demanding ransom. Then Diana stood up. "Your Honor, this is a simple property rights case dressed up in emotional language. Mr. Kimball owns the bridge. The HOA has no easement, no deed right, and no legal claim to use his property without his permission. For 30 years, his grandfather graciously allowed access. Mr. Kimball is also allowing access, just under different terms." $10 per crossing seems excessive, Judge Hayes said. "Is it, Your Honor? The Georgia Tollway Authority charges comparable rates for bridge crossings. Mr. Kimball's bridge handles hundreds of vehicles per day, causing wear, tear, and liability exposure. He could simply close the bridge entirely, but instead, he's offering reasonable access for a reasonable fee." What about emergency access? The judge asked. Mr. Kimball has agreed to allow emergency vehicles free passage at all times. Fire, ambulance, police, all have standing authorization. His dispute is with the HOA and its residents, not with public safety. Pritchard jumped back in. Your Honor, many of these residents are elderly or on fixed incomes. They can't afford $4,000 per year just to access their homes. Diana smiled. Then perhaps the HOA should use its budget to purchase easement rights from Mr. Kimball. Or better yet, pay for the annual passes for their residents. The HOA collects nearly $800,000 per year in fees according to their own financial disclosures. They can afford it. Judge Hayes looked down at the papers in front of him for a long moment. Here's what I'm going to do, he said. I'm denying the emergency injunction. Mr. Kimball has a clear property right here, and the HOA's failure to secure proper access 30 years ago is not his problem to solve for free. However, I'm encouraging both parties to negotiate a reasonable solution. Mr. Kimball, you might want to consider that maintaining good relations with 250 families who are your neighbors is worth something. And HOA, you might want to consider that Mr. Kimball could charge a lot more than he is, or close the bridge entirely. Work it out. He banged his gavel, and that was it. I had won, at least for now. Walking out of the courthouse, I was swarmed by angry residents who had attended the hearing. Someone called me a soulless parasite. Someone else suggested my grandfather would be ashamed of me. One woman actually spit in my direction but missed. Diana pulled me away. Welcome to property law. You did good. Why do I feel terrible? Because you're not actually a soulless parasite, but don't let them guilt you. This is business, and they would do the same in your position. That night, I sat in the cabin and read through my emails. Most were still angry, but a few were different. One resident, Harold Liang, had written a thoughtful message explaining that he was on a fixed income and the fees would genuinely hardship him out of his home. Another, Melissa Torres, was a single mother whose commute costs were already stretching her budget. I felt the guilt Diana had warned me about. These weren't all entitled rich people. Some were just regular folks who had bought homes in what seemed like a nice community and were now caught in a battle they didn't start. But another part of me remembered that condescending letter from Brenda Morrison, the assumption that I would just roll over and do what the HOA wanted, the entitlement, the threats. I compromised with myself. I sent out an email offering a hardship program. Anyone who could demonstrate genuine financial need could apply for a reduced rate of $200 per year. I'd verify their information and make individual decisions. I also offered the HOA a buyout price for a permanent easement, $2 million, plus they assume all future maintenance and liability for the bridge. The response to my hardship program was overwhelming. I got over 100 applications in the first day. Some were clearly legitimate, fixed-income seniors or single parents. Others were people who drove $80,000 cars, but claimed poverty because they were house poor. I worked through them systematically, approving about 40%. It was more administrative work than I expected, but it felt like the right thing to do. The HOA's response to my easement offer was a flat rejection and an increased legal assault. They filed additional motions, tried to get the county involved, and even contacted the local news. That's how I ended up on Channel 7 News Thursday night, portrayed as a controversial landowner who was holding a community hostage. They interviewed Brenda Morrison, who cried on camera about elderly residents who couldn't afford to leave their homes. They also interviewed me, though they edited my comments to make me look worse than I was. I had explained the whole history, the property rights, my grandfather's foresight, but what aired was just me saying, "It's my bridge. I can charge what I want." The internet found the story Friday morning. Suddenly, I was getting emails from across the country. Half the people called me a hero for standing up to an HOA. The other half called me a monster for profiteering off people's homes. A few lawyers reached out offering to represent the HOA for free, seeing it as a good cause. Diana just laughed when I told her. Let them, she said. Your legal position hasn't changed. What did change was the HOA's tactics. Saturday morning, I woke up to find someone had vandalized my toll booth, spray painting "extortion and greedy parasite" across the walls. They had also slashed 2 of my tires and poured sugar in my gas tank. I called Deputy Martinez. "I'll file a report," he said, looking at the damage. "But between you and me, Frank, you might want to get some security cameras. Feelings are running pretty high. You think it'll get worse? I think you've got a couple hundred angry people who feel trapped, and some of them aren't going to stay reasonable." I installed 6 security cameras that day, covering the bridge, the toll booth, and the cabin. I also started sleeping with my grandfather's shotgun next to the bed, though I hoped I would never need it. Sunday was quiet. Almost too quiet. Traffic was way down. Then Monday morning, I understood why. The HOA had organized a stay-home protest. Residents were being encouraged to work from home, skip non-essential trips, and minimize their bridge crossings to reduce my revenue. Some had even left town entirely, staying with family or in hotels, waiting for the dispute to resolve. My toll income dropped by 60% overnight. Brenda Morrison sent me a gloating email. "You want to play hardball? Let's see how profitable your little toll booth is when nobody uses it. We can outlast you, Mr. Kimball." She was probably right. I had my software engineering salary, but that required me to actually be in Atlanta working, not camping out at a rural property managing a toll bridge. The HOA had deep pockets and hundreds of motivated members, but they had also just made their first major mistake. I forwarded Brenda's email to Diana along with screenshots of the HOA's Facebook page where they were coordinating the protest. "Is this legal?" I asked. Diana called me back within an hour, and she was laughing. "Frank, they just handed us a gift. This is potentially tortious interference with business relations. They're actively organizing to damage your legitimate business. We can sue them for this." Would we win? Maybe, maybe not, but it would cost them a fortune to defend, and it shows bad faith in any settlement negotiations. Send them a cease and desist immediately. I did better than that. I sent a cease and desist to the HOA board, and then I sent individual letters to 15 residents I could identify as protest organizers from their social media posts. The letters explained that they were potentially personally liable for damages to my business and should consult their own attorneys. The protest fell apart within 48 hours. Turns out people are a lot less enthusiastic about activism when their personal assets are on the line. Traffic returned to normal, and so did my revenue. But the atmosphere had changed. This wasn't just a property dispute anymore. It was a war, and both sides were getting uglier. Wednesday night, someone threw a brick through my cabin window with a note attached, "Leave or else." Thursday morning, I found my security cameras had been spray painted over during the night. When I reviewed the footage from before they were blinded, I saw 3 figures in hoodies, faces covered, approaching around 2 a.m. Deputy Martinez came out again. "Frank, this is escalating. Have you thought about just taking the HOA's settlement offer?" "They haven't made a settlement offer. They demanded I grant them a free easement and pay their legal fees. Maybe it's time to consider moving on. Is this bridge really worth all this trouble?" I looked at the damage, the broken window, the ruined cameras. "It's not about the bridge anymore, Deputy. It's about the principle. They thought they could bully me because I'm one person and they're an organization. If I back down now, what does that say?" He sighed. "It says you're smart enough to know when to fold. But I can tell you're not going to do that. So instead, I'm going to suggest you invest in better security. Maybe stay somewhere else for a while." I replaced the cameras with better models mounted higher and in protective housings. I also hired a security company to do night patrols of my property. It cost me $2,000 a week, but it was worth it for the peace of mind. The legal case ground forward slowly. Discovery, depositions, motions, all the usual litigation dance. Diana was earning her fee, but she warned me this could take a year or more to fully resolve. "They're trying to wait you out," she explained. "Run up your legal bills, make your life miserable, hope you settle cheap. What if I don't want to settle at all? Then we go to trial and probably win. But Frank, even winning costs money and time. At some point, you need to ask yourself what this is really costing you beyond dollars." She was right. I had burned through most of my PTO and was working remotely from the cabin, which my boss wasn't thrilled about. My relationship with my girlfriend Sarah had gotten strained because I was always distracted or dealing with bridge drama. I wasn't sleeping well. The toll bridge was consuming my life. But every time I thought about giving in, I would get another condescending email from Brenda Morrison or Thomas Pritchard, and my resolve would harden again. Then things changed in a way I didn't expect. A resident named Frederick Kane reached out to me directly. He was a retired attorney, early 70s, who had moved to Lakeside Meadows 5 years ago. His email was different from the others, thoughtful and respectful. Mr. Kimball, I've been following this dispute with great interest. I wonder if you would be willing to meet with me privately, off the record, to discuss a potential solution that might benefit everyone involved. I was suspicious, but something about his tone made me agree. We met at a coffee shop in town, neutral territory. Frederick was a distinguished-looking man with white hair and sharp eyes. He ordered black coffee and got right to the point. "You're going to win this case," he said. "I've reviewed the filings and I've researched the property history. Your legal position is nearly unassailable." "Then why are we meeting?" "Because winning in court and winning in life are two different things. You'll get a judgment that says you own the bridge and can charge for access. The HOA will appeal, drag it out, make your life hell for years. And even when it's finally over, you'll be living next to 250 families who hate you. I don't live here. I live in Atlanta." "But you own property here, property you apparently care about, since you haven't just sold it and walked away. Your grandfather's property. That means something to you." He was right, of course. The cabin and land weren't just assets to me. They were my connection to my grandfather, memories of childhood visits and his stories about building the bridge. "What are you proposing?" I asked. "A real negotiation, not the posturing that's been happening. The HOA has genuine concerns about access and costs. You have legitimate property rights and deserve compensation. There's a middle ground if both sides approach this like adults instead of combatants." I tried reasonable. I offered a buyout price. They rejected it. Because Brenda Morrison is an idiot who's more concerned with winning than solving problems. But not everyone on the board is like her. There are reasonable people who are horrified by how this has escalated. "Are you on the board?" "No, but I know people who are. Give me permission to float a proposal confidentially. If it goes nowhere, you've lost nothing. If it works, maybe we can end this." I thought about my broken window, my ruined cameras, the death threats, and the legal bills. What kind of proposal? "Let me work on that. But it would involve the HOA paying you for an easement, you getting meaningful compensation, and both sides walking away with their dignity intact." I agreed to let him try. I didn't have much hope, but I was tired enough to grasp at any straw. A week later, Frederick called me back. "I have a proposal. The HOA will pay you $1.2 million for a permanent easement across the bridge. They assume all maintenance and liability going forward. You retain ownership of the actual bridge structure and the land beneath it, but you grant them irrevocable access rights." That's 40% less than I asked for. It's also 40% more than nothing, and it comes with certainty instead of years of litigation. Plus, I got them to agree to drop all their lawsuits with prejudice and issue a public statement acknowledging your property rights. "What about my legal fees?" "They'll pay $50,000 toward your fees. I know that doesn't cover everything you've spent, but it's something." I ran the numbers in my head. 1.2 million minus Diana's fees, minus taxes. I'd net probably 800,000 after everything. That was life-changing money for me. I could pay off my student loans, my car, put a down payment on a real house. But more than the money, it was the idea of being done. No more toll booth, no more security patrols, no more angry emails and vandalism. I could go back to my normal life. "I need to think about it," I told Frederick. "Fair enough. But Frank, the reasonable people won't stay in charge forever. Brenda is already fighting this internally. If she regains control, any settlement offer disappears and we're back to total war." I called Diana and walked her through the proposal. "It's not a bad offer," she admitted. "Less than we might get at trial, but trials are uncertain. And it's enough to make this worthwhile for you. You think I should take it?" "I think you should decide what you actually want out of this. If you want to make a point about property rights and stick it to an HOA, we can keep fighting and probably win big. If you want to get paid and move on with your life, this is a reasonable exit." That night I sat in the cabin and really thought about what I wanted. The toll bridge had started as a reaction to Brenda Morrison's condescending letter, a refusal to be bullied. It had become something bigger, a statement about property rights and standing up to organizational intimidation. But it had also become exhausting and all-consuming. I missed my regular life. I missed spending time with Sarah without being distracted. I missed working on my actual job instead of managing a toll bridge. I missed sleeping through the night without worrying about vandalism. My grandfather had been a fighter, but he had also been practical. He had maintained his property rights for 30 years, but he had done it quietly, without drama. He probably would have laughed at the toll booth, even as he approved of the principle. I called Frederick the next morning. I'll accept the proposal with 3 conditions. First, the HOA issues a formal apology for the vandalism and harassment. Second, they fund the hardship program I created for low-income residents for the next year, even though the toll booth is going away. Third, Brenda Morrison is not involved in any of the final negotiations or signing. Frederick laughed. That third one might be the easiest to arrange. She's already been voted off the board. Turns out organizing vandalism and harassment campaigns isn't great leadership. Wait, what? Oh, you didn't know? The board finally reviewed the security footage from some of the incidents. One of the vandals was Brenda's son, acting on her instructions. When that came out, the board forced her to resign. There might be criminal charges pending. I felt a wave of satisfaction that was probably petty but entirely human. Then we have a deal, pending my attorney's review of the final documents. The next 2 weeks were a flurry of paperwork. Diana negotiated the final terms, making sure every detail protected my interests. The HOA's new president, a reasonable accountant named Michael Stevens, was professional and straightforward to deal with. The hardest part was dismantling the toll booth. I had only operated it for 6 weeks, but it had become a symbol. Taking it down felt like admitting defeat, even though I was walking away with over $1 million. The closing was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon at the Monroe County Courthouse. I drove down from Atlanta, where I had finally returned to full-time in office work. Sarah came with me, supportive despite everything. The HOA had representatives there, including Frederick and Michael. Brenda Morrison was notably absent, apparently dealing with criminal mischief charges related to the vandalism campaign. Thomas Pritchard was also gone, replaced by a local attorney who seemed relieved to be handling a settlement instead of prolonged litigation. We signed the documents, transferred the money, and shook hands. It was anticlimactic after all the drama. "Mr. Kimball," Michael said as we were leaving, "I want to apologize for how this started. That letter from Brenda was inappropriate, and the way some of our residents behaved was inexcusable. For what it's worth, I'm glad we could find a reasonable resolution." "Me too," I said, and meant it. Walking out of the courthouse, Sarah squeezed my hand. "How do you feel?" "Relieved, tired, rich, mostly just ready to move on." "What are you going to do with the money?" "Pay off debt, save for a house, maybe take you on a really nice vacation to make up for being a stressed-out mess for the past 2 months." She smiled. "I like that plan." We drove back to Atlanta, and I watched the rural Georgia landscape roll past the windows. Somewhere back there was my grandfather's property, the cabin, and the bridge that had consumed my life for 6 weeks. The bridge was still mine technically, but the easement meant I would never control access to it again. That was fine. I had made my point, gotten compensated for my property rights, and come out ahead. The toll booth was gone, but the principle remained. The following Monday, I got an email from Deputy Martinez with a subject line that made me laugh. "Thought you'd want to know." The message explained that Brenda Morrison had been formally charged with conspiracy to commit criminal mischief and vandalism. Apparently, the investigation had turned up extensive evidence of her coordinating the damage to my property, including text messages directing her son and 2 other residents to make that bridge bastard's life hell. She was facing up to 2 years in jail and significant fines. The other participants were being charged as well, though they were expected to take plea deals and testify against Brenda. Even better, several residents were suing her personally for damaging the community's reputation and causing the HOA to spend hundreds of thousands in legal fees on a case they ultimately lost. Her life in Lakeside Meadows was effectively over. I should have felt triumphant, but mostly I just felt sad. The whole thing had been so unnecessary. If Brenda had approached me respectfully from the beginning, we probably could have worked out a reasonable arrangement without lawyers or toll booths or vandalism. But she had assumed she could bully me, and that assumption had cost her everything. Diana called me a few days later with a final update. The judge approved the settlement. Everything's officially closed. You're done, Frank. Thank you for everything, Diana. You were amazing. It was a fun case. Not often I get to defend someone's property rights against an HOA and actually win. Most of my clients lose their houses fighting these battles. Why do people buy into HO as if they're so terrible? Because they want the pool and the tennis courts and the manicured lawns. They don't think about the cost until it's too late. You got lucky inheriting property free and clear. After we hung up, I sat at my desk in Atlanta and pulled up the photos I had taken of the toll booth. It looked ridiculous in retrospect, a DIY structure with its hand-painted signs and cheap gate arm. But for 6 weeks, it had been my stand against organizational bullying and property rights violations. The money from the settlement hit my account the next week. $1.2 million, minus about $200,000 in legal fees and costs. I paid off my $60,000 in student loans, my car loan, and put half the remainder into investments. The other half went into a down payment on a small house in a nice Atlanta neighborhood with, notably, no HOA. Sarah and I took that vacation in July, 2 weeks in Italy that felt like a dream after the stress of the bridge dispute. We ate amazing food, saw incredible art, and barely talked about HOAs or toll booths at all. When we got back, I found a letter waiting for me from Frederick Kane. Inside was a handwritten note and a newspaper clipping. The note read, "Frank, thought you'd appreciate seeing how things worked out. The community is much better off without Brenda's leadership. Thank you for standing up for your rights, even when it got difficult. Your grandfather would have been proud. Best regards, Frederick." The clipping was from the local Monroe County paper. It detailed Brenda Morrison's sentencing: 18 months of probation, 200 hours of community service, and a $10,000 fine. She had avoided jail time by pleading guilty and agreeing to pay restitution to me for the property damage. The article also mentioned that Lakeside Meadows had elected a new board focused on transparency and community relations, and had implemented new policies preventing board members from taking legal action without majority resident approval. My toll bridge had accidentally reformed an entire HOA's governance structure. That felt like a better legacy than the money. I pinned Frederick's note to my refrigerator, right next to a photo of my grandfather standing in front of the bridge he had built. In the picture, he was smiling slightly, the way he always did when he was satisfied with his work. The bridge stood for another purpose now, no longer a point of contention, but a passage freely granted under terms both sides had agreed to. It was still my bridge, technically, but it belonged to the community in practice. That seemed like the right balance. Property rights protected, but used reasonably. Individual liberty preserved, but exercised with consideration for others. The toll booth was gone, but the principle it represented remained. 6 months later, I got a wedding invitation in the mail. Harold Leong, the fixed-income resident who had qualified for my hardship program, was getting married to Melissa Torres, the single mother who had also received reduced rates. They had apparently met in the toll booth line during those chaotic early weeks, bonded over their shared frustration, and fallen in love. The invitation included a note. "You brought us together, even if you didn't mean to. Please come celebrate with us." I RSVP'd yes and bought them a nice gift. At the wedding, held in a pavilion at Lakeside Meadows, I was surprised by how many residents came up to shake my hand and thank me for the way things had worked out. "The new board is so much better," one woman told me. "We actually get to vote on things now." "Brenda was a nightmare for years," a man said. "You did us a favor exposing her." Even the people who had sent me angry emails seemed to have moved on. The toll booth had become a funny story, the weird 6 weeks when they had to pay to cross a bridge into their own neighborhood. At the reception, Frederick found me and raised his glass. "To Frank Kimball, the man who reformed an HOA from the outside. May your bridge stand for 100 years. I raised my glass back. "To property rights, reasonable compromises, and knowing when to fight and when to settle." Sarah, sitting beside me, added quietly, "And to moving on with your life." That was the real lesson, I thought. The toll booth had been right at the time, a necessary stand against overreach and bullying. But knowing when to close it down and take the settlement had been equally right. Principle matters, but so does proportion. Driving home that night, I took a detour past the property. The cabin was dark, the bridge quiet in the moonlight. No toll booth, no gate, just a simple concrete and steel structure spanning Willow Creek the way it had for nearly 40 years. My grandfather had built it to last, and it would outlive all of us, all the disputes and settlements and drama. The bridge remained, connecting one piece of land to another, serving its purpose regardless of who owned it or who crossed it. That felt right. Some things are worth fighting for, but in the end, they're just things. The real value is in knowing your worth, standing up for your rights, and being wise enough to know when you've won enough. I owned the bridge, but the bridge had taught me something more valuable than money, that power without wisdom is just noise, and that the best victories are the ones where everyone walks away better than they started. The toll booth was gone, but its lesson remained. And that, I thought, as I drove back to Atlanta and the life I had reclaimed, was worth more than any amount of toll revenue could ever have been.